Week 8 is upon us, and I'm going through every single game to break down exactly what you guys should be doing in your fantasy football lineups. Everything from game environments, over-unders, implied totals, where the sharps are betting, and also 5 key matchups, including wide receiver cornerback stuff. This is matchups that matter. If you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. But let's kick things off. We have 0 teams on bye this week. There are 32 teams in action, which means there are 16 games that we need to go through, starting with Thursday Night Football. The Minnesota Vikings traveling to Los Angeles. They are actually road favorites against the Rams. Feels like a little bit of a trap game, in my opinion, given the fact that the Rams are starting to get healthier with Cooper Kupp coming back. Probably Puka Nacua a little bit ways away so far. The over-under on this game is actually 48 points, which is the second highest total of the slate. A little bit of a lower scoring slate than what we saw last week as far as what the Vegas over-under totals looked like. Pace of play is pretty solid. Minnesota's DVOA matchup, pretty solid. The key matchups to pay attention to, I'm sure you guys are, of course, starting, your Justin Jeffersons and your Cooper Kupps, assuming that he plays. Both quarterbacks actually have pretty bad matchups. So Sam Darnold, Matthew Stafford, I would recommend potentially streaming other quarterback options this week, particularly with Sam Darnold. I feel like some people are going to be tempted to play him. High-scoring game. But the quarterback matchup for the Rams defense is actually a little bit tougher than usual. Kyren Williams, a brutal matchup against the Minnesota run defense, but he, of course, is very automatic on the goal line, so that is where you get the appeal from him. Just probably not a great efficiency day coming for Kyren Williams. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison versus the Los Angeles cornerbacks, also a pretty difficult matchup. So all around, not a great matchup for the Vikings passing game. TJ Hawkinson, if he plays, I think is a viable streamer. Although if you have better options, I think you could probably exercise those because TJ Hawkinson is coming off an ACL tear if he ends up suiting up at all. Even though it's a great matchup, I would like to see a game of usage before I throw him back out there to the Wolves in my fantasy football lineup. And then if Cooper Kupp plays, which it looks like he's going to, he is officially off the injury report. He has a great matchup against the Minnesota secondary. They are not good specifically against slot receivers like Cooper Kupp. So getting into the 1 p.m. slate, the way that we have the breakdown going this week is actually really, really nice. We have 8 1 p.m. games, 5 4 p.m. games, and then a singular game Sunday night, singular game Monday night. I think this is the premier way that they could break down the games here, as much as I'll miss, the London 9:30 a.m. kickoff. We do have Packers at Jaguars, first game we're going to talk about. Over-under of 49.5, the highest scoring game on the entire slate per Vegas, over catching a good bit of the steam. And the Packers offense versus the Jaguars defense is the biggest matchup discrepancy between an offense and a defense this weekend. We also see that the key matchups here, Jordan Love going up against the Jacksonville secondary, like I said, cake matchup for him. He's a top 5 quarterback on the week for me. Both running backs in difficult spots, Travis Etienne / Tank Bigsby and Josh Jacobs. Not the greatest matchups on paper there. Jaden Reed and company against the Jacksonville secondary is a very easy matchup, particularly for Jaden Reed. The weakest part of the Jacksonville secondary has been what they've been able to do against slot receivers, so Jaden Reed could be in for a monster performance this week. Christian Kirk has a little bit of an easier matchup as far as the slot corner for the Green Bay Packers being the weak link of that secondary as well, but in general, they're a pretty good defense against fantasy football wide receivers. You're still, of course, starting Brian Thomas, but fringe guys like Christian Kirk and Trevor Lawrence can definitely stay on your bench. And then Evan Ingram and Tucker Kraft are both streamable tight ends this week. Ingram getting great volume. Tucker Kraft, of course, being heavily involved in the red zone. And then the kickers are also pretty good matchups here because of the 49.5 point over-under. So moving into the next game, we have the Jets at Patriots, the famous Sea and Ghost matchup here. The Drake May Express train will have another tough challenge. We saw him play well against the Houston Texans a couple weeks back in his first start. Jets defense, no different. A pretty tough matchup for him. Over-under of just 41 points. Jets DVOA on offense, a pretty nice advantage over the Patriots DVOA on defense. Some of the key matchups to pay attention to, Aaron Rodgers and Drake May both have difficult matchups, so I probably wouldn't mess with those guys. You should have some better options, and at the end of this video, I'll be breaking down streaming quarterback options and streaming defense options based on the information we talk about here. Breece Hall versus the Patriots run defense, very easy matchup. Fire him up, of course. He was in your lineup anyways, but, expect big things out of Breece Hall. Of course, Danny has him in the flock league, so I got to go against that. Devontae Adams is expected to see the shadow matchup from Christian Gonzalez. Of course, last week we didn't know if it was going to be Garrett Wilson seeing shadow coverage, if it was going to be Devontae Adams seeing shadow coverage. It was, in fact, Joey Porter on Devontae Adams last week, which means that Christian Gonzalez is likely to be his shadow matchup this week. Ramondre Stevenson, Hunter Henry, and Demario Douglas, all in for average matchups. They are definitely playable options at their positions. And then if you do want a streaming defense this week, the Jets defense against the Patriots, not a bad option, although Drake May is a little bit better than that 29th against fantasy defenses would indicate, because a lot of that stuff came with Jacoby Brissett, although back on Thursday night, a couple weeks back, the Jets did absolutely dominate the Patriots offensive line up front. So moving into the Eagles at Bengals, you guys can see the matchup data there. High over-under game, 48 points. Over catching the most amount of steam of any game on the entire slate with 97% of the cash on the over. And then the Cincinnati DVOA matchup, a pretty nice advantage, as is the Eagles matchup, an above average matchup for them as well. So moving into the key matchups, you have Jalen Hurts versus the Cincinnati defense. Jalen Hurts, a very, very good starter this week. Joe Burrow versus the Eagles defense, not nearly as good of a starter, but you're probably still firing him up as a top 12 quarterback. Both running backs have bottom 12 matchups, so temper expectations a little bit. For Chase Brown specifically, Saquon Barkley's a stud. Of course, he's going to get there no matter what. But Chase Brown specifically might be the type of guy that if you have better options, maybe you could pivot off of against the Eagles' run defense. Both wide receiver cores above average matchups. So, of course, you are firing up A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, all inside my top 25 wide receivers this week. Stream Dallas Goedert and both kickers as well, because Dallas Goedert has a great, great matchup, and both kickers in a high-scoring game always in play, and both of them are good kickers as well, Evan McPherson and Jake Elliott. So, Ravens at Browns, the next game we're going to talk about here. The Ravens implied for 26.75 points, 9-point road favorites against the Browns here. This is going to be an interesting matchup because, of course, there is no more Deshaun Watson. It will be Jameis Winston at quarterback for the Cleveland Browns here, and the overcatching a very, very high percentage of the steam here as well, 97% of the cash. The DVOA matchup second on the entire slate for the Ravens offense against the Browns defense, and vice versa. The Browns offense against the Ravens defense, not a very good matchup, but as we kind of already made reference to, Jameis Winston might elevate the play of this offense beyond what the trash bag of an offense they were with Deshaun Watson. Key matchups to look forward to, running backs and quarterbacks. The quarterbacks have above average matchups. Again, you're probably not messing with Jameis Winston, but Lamar is definitely in your lineup. Both running backs have bottom 12 matchups. So again, temper expectations for Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry, but generally speaking, they are both in your lineup as well. Both wide receiver cores have top 6 matchups. So if you wanted to mess around with some of the deeper names on the slate, again, there's no bye week, so there's probably not as much of a reason to do that, but we did suffer a lot of major injuries at wide receiver last week. So if you wanted to throw out Cedric Tillman, Jerry Jeudy on the Browns side, you could probably do that. If you wanted to throw out Rashad Bateman on the Ravens side, you could probably do that, assuming Zay Flowers is healthy. He is in your lineup as well. David Njoku against the Ravens defense, a very good spot for him. And then if you guys are looking for a streaming defense, the Ravens defense going up against Jameis Winston in his first start, definitely, as I know as a Buccaneers fan, a turnover-prone quarterback. Titans at Lions, staying in the 1 p.m. window here. We have 11.5-point home favorites, the Detroit Lions. I think that's one of the biggest spreads I've seen all season, implied for 28.25 points. The over catching a good amount of steam in this game, but generally speaking, a pretty ho-hum game. We expect Detroit to probably win by a wide margin. Both quarterbacks below average matchups, so you may want to steer clear of Jared Goff here. Nobody was starting Mason Rudolph to begin with, but Jared Goff, not a great matchup for the fantasy quarterback position against the Titans, who have actually allowed the least amount of yards of any team in the NFL. Both running backs have bottom 10 matchups as well, so Tony Pollard, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, they're definitely still in your lineup, but temper expectations, maybe not a great spot for them. Lions wide receivers, not the greatest of spots there, but St. Brown has the best matchup on the field in the slot. And, of course, Jameson Williams is suspended for this game. And then Titans wide receivers, I actually just traded for Calvin Ridley in our flock league. I don't feel great about it, but given the volume that he's seen, 17 targets over the last 2 games, it could be a bounce-back spot for him against the Lions defense that is giving it away to the wide receiver position. Sam Laporta expects to see a bump with Jameson Williams out of the lineup for the next 2 weeks, but it is a tough matchup against the Titans defense. Still a very viable top 12 tight end for me on the week, and I still think he's a half-decent buy low as well. And then stream the Lions defense and kicker, especially especially the Lions defense. It is a very, very good spot against Mason Rudolph. We expect him to be the starting quarterback, and then kicker-wise too, the Lions kicker is a great option. So Colts at Texans. Texans minus 5 points. Per Vegas, implied for 25.5 as well. Pace of play is very fast in this game, so it looks like we should have a pretty up-tempo state of offenses here. Both quarterbacks have top 10 matchups. CJ Stroud should be in your lineup for sure. The one thing that I would worry about starting Anthony Richardson is that even though it's a good matchup, he is a little bit inconsistent, has dealt with injuries. He is running a little bit more now that he's healthy, so that is encouraging. I actually had to drop him in my home league because I needed an extra bench spot, and good luck to the person who picked him up in my home league, because he's absolutely terrible, or at least he's been absolutely terrible. But it wouldn't shock me if he had a pretty decent game in this one. Jonathan Taylor versus the Texans run defense, terrible matchup. Not a great one for him to come back to after the injury. It looks like he will play this week. I wouldn't expect Tyler Goodson, Trey Sermon to be relevant. Joe Mixon, Indianapolis run defense is pretty soft, so I think he should have a great game. These teams actually, I believe, played back in week 1, and Joe Mixon just absolutely ripped it right through them. So he had a pretty good game in that one. I think he got like 30 carries, so it looks like that could be the stage yet again. Colts wide receivers and Houston wide receivers, above average matchup for the Colts wide receivers. Pittman, Downs, probably the only two that would really see fantasy lineups. And then Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, about an average matchup. If you need a streaming tight end this week, Dalton Schultz, a pretty decent option still, as Nico Collins is out. They're looking for some other targets in that offense. He's a pretty decent option there. And then if you need a defense, Houston DST also makes a lot of sense against the Anthony Richardson-led Colts, where he's known for making some boneheaded mistakes from time to time. Cardinals at Dolphins. 3.5-point favorites are the Miami Dolphins, which is shocking, but the reason for that is Tua Tagovailoa is expected to come back. He is expected and on track to start this game despite the horrific concussion that he suffered back in week 2. It appears after 6 weeks off or whatever, he has cleared the concussion protocol by quite a bit by the sounds of it. It sounds like he probably may not have even needed to go on IR, but because of the whole publicity aspect of everything, that is probably what ended up happening. And again, neurologist, he was, I'm sure, consulting when it came to should he keep playing, should he retire, and all that kind of stuff. But regardless, it elevates this Dolphins offense to very, very fantasy relevant and functional. 46.5-point over-under, second highest pace of play game on the entire slate. Key matchups to pay attention to. I do think you can stream Tua Tagovailoa as soon as this week against the Arizona defense. Maybe you want to give it one more game to see if this offense looks back to normal, but Tua was pretty good in week 1, was pretty good before he suffered that injury in week 2, and this offense should have some signs of light with Tyreek Hill now having his quarterback back, with Jalen Waddle and Devon Achane now having their quarterbacks back. Both running backs have average matchups, so again, Achane and Connor both in your lineup probably regardless. Kyler Murray, maybe a sit if you have better options. Like if you, for example, had like a Caleb Williams or, somebody that was a good streamer this week, Brock Purdy, I'll talk about later. I wouldn't blame you for sitting Kyler Murray against a tough Miami defense. And then Marvin Harrison versus Jalen Ramsey is the shadow matchup we're looking at here. Not great if you were going to buy Marvin Harrison Jr. Maybe you want to even wait a week because he might have another stinker against Jalen Ramsey and the Dolphins. And then again, Tyreek and Waddle, definitely your last chance to buy them is right now. I'm sure the manager is well aware that Tua is playing, but I would still be willing to pay the price because even if the manager who has Tyreek and Jalen Waddle knows that Tua's coming back and maybe they're expecting a high-end wide receiver 2 and a low-end wide receiver 3 because Tua's coming back and he's not quite himself, I would venture a guess to say that there is probably still a little bit of value to be had, even if the opposing manager knows that Tyreek Hill is going to be great once Tua's back on the field. Tyreek Hill has legitimate possibility, if Tua's healthy, to be the best receiver in fantasy still. Jalen Waddle has the possibility to be a top 15 to 20 wide receiver still, and maybe they're not baking that in to their current cost, so send out some offers for those guys. Falcons at Buccaneers, a rematch of the barn burner we saw on Thursday night a couple weeks back. Falcons are 2.5-point road favorites. Again, Baker Mayfield struggling in last week's game against the Ravens, and now without Chris Godwin, without Mike Evans, at least until after the Bucs Week 10 bye. Not a great situation to be had for this Buccaneers offense. As a Bucs fan, I'm definitely a little depressed about it. 7th highest over-under on the slate, 46 points. Pace of play is very strong. Tampa Bay's DVOA, again, that's obviously going to be skewed with the receivers, but it is a good matchup for them. Hopefully we can see Jalen McMillan and Trey Palmer and some of these other guys start to take a step forward. Key matchups to watch, both quarterbacks in really good spots here. So if you do want to play Kirk Cousins, he is one of the premier streamers this week, absolutely. And even if Baker Mayfield doesn't have his weapons, I think he's a half-decent streamer as well. We'll have to see how much they rely on the run game. We'll have to see how much they let Baker throw the ball without his offensive stars at the wide receiver position. Rashad White, Sean Tucker, and Bucky Irving versus the Atlanta run defense. Not a good matchup for them. So again, if you didn't need to start them, I wouldn't. Bijan Robinson and Algier, again, kind of a tough matchup versus the Buccaneers run defense, but I feel pretty good that Bijan Robinson is still a very strong start. Both wide receiver cores have top 7 matchups, so you're firing up Drake London, of course. You are probably firing up Darnell Mooney as well because he has been pretty good as of late, and he actually went off against the Buccaneers on that Thursday night game for like 31 fantasy points. And Jalen McMillan, I think, is a fine spot start if you guys lost Ayuk or if you lost Godwin or if you lost Metcalf or you lost Evans or whatever. There were so many injuries last week that I'd imagine a lot of people are going to be firing up Jalen McMillan at the wide receiver position this week, and I think that is totally fine. We'll have to see how the usage looks, but Jalen McMillan, to me, for my money, is going to be the slot guy, or hopefully takes over the slot role and the Godwin role in this offense. And then both tight ends, Kyle Pitts and Cade Otton, are definitely usable, as are both kickers, Younghoe Koo and Chase McLaughlin. So moving into the Saints at Chargers, the next game that we're going to talk about here, we have the Chargers 7.5-point favorites at home, overcatching 87% of the money. Not a very good, game environment, 40.5-point over-under, kind of a ho-hum game overall. The key matchups are more interesting really than the game environment because both quarterbacks not in great spots, but J.K. Dobbins, absolutely a very, very good matchup versus the Saints run defense. They've been so bad against the run. They let pretty much anybody run all over them. Javonte Williams did it last Thursday. The Buccaneers running backs did it 2 weeks ago. So I really like J.K. Dobbins to have a big matchup against the New Orleans Saints this week. Even if, Justin Herbert and Spencer Rattler are not having a great day on offense for the quarterback position, I like J.K. Dobbins to get it done. We heard Alvin Kamara come out and say that he's dealing with like a multitude of injuries, including like a broken hand or, he's been on the injury report all season long. Definitely make sure that you guys are stashing Kendre Miller going into this game because it would not shock me if at some point this season, Alvin Kamara, sits out a game or two because he's dealing with all these injuries, or maybe he re-aggravates something that he's currently dealing with and it keeps him out for a long period of time. Make sure that Kendre Miller is rostered. He is a high priority handcuff given the fact that Kamara is currently banged up. Both wide receiver cores, bottom 10 matchups. Not that you were really excited about starting Chris Olave. You probably still have to, given that he is a pretty solid wide receiver one as far as usage is concerned. Ladd McConkey, QJ, anybody else not really of relevance to this matchup. And then defense-wise, definitely Chargers defense, a great spot against Spencer Rattler, as is the Chargers kicker as well. So moving into the next game, we have the Bills at Seahawks. I believe we're still in the 1 p.m. window slate. This is the first 4 p.m. game that we have here. Bills minus 3-point favorites on the road against Seattle. Tough place to play, big time travel distance as well, so that could factor in for Buffalo. They're going all the way to the West Coast, pretty much across the country. The over-under is 47 points, very high-scoring game environment, overcatching a big portion of the steam, and the pace of play, it is the fastest on the slate as well, so very, very good game environment for fantasy production. The Bills implied for 25 points, Seahawks implied for 22 points. Josh Allen versus the Seahawks pass defense, very good spot. Obviously, you're starting him. He should have a great game. Geno Smith, not in a great spot, so I don't think he necessarily has to be in your lineup, especially now without DK Metcalf in the lineup. I don't think he has to be in your lineup for sure. Kenneth Walker versus the Bills run defense doesn't get any easier than that. He should probably have a monster game yet again. He's been on fire as of late. James Cook versus the Seahawks run defense, kind of an average ho-hum matchup. And then both wide receivers rank average against the pass there. So if you need to start Amari Cooper, he's a fine play because the Seahawks are average against the pass. If you need to start Jackson Smith and Jigba, Tyler Lockett, I think are fine flex plays as well. Moving into the second of 5 4 p.m. games here, we have the Denver Broncos at the Carolina Panthers. Broncos are 10-point road favorites, which is crazy. This is a horrible game environment. Maybe you could fire up some Denver Broncos if you needed to here, but this is not something that I want to tether myself to because, number one, Bryce Young is starting for the Carolina Panthers. That has already been announced. Andy Dalton got in a car accident, suffered a thumb injury or something like that. So not a great situation. I feared this was going to happen at some point. On Wednesday's video, I said, make sure you sell Deontay Johnson before Bryce Young gets announced the starter, because as we remember from earlier in the season, Bryce Young was terrible and not nearly as good for Deontay Johnson as Andy Dalton was. So that's something that we're going to need to pay attention to. Both quarterbacks have above average matchups. I think you could stream Bo Nix if you needed to in this game. It's a very easy matchup for him. Javonte Williams in a smash spot against the Carolina Panthers run defense. He's really the only guy that I feel very comfortable starting from this game, period. Chuba Hubbard versus the Broncos run defense, not a good spot. I do expect Jonathan Brooks to make his season debut here, but I'm not starting. I mean, you definitely don't want to put him into your lineup right away, and it also downgrades Chuba Hubbard because I think he's probably going to lose a little bit of touches to Jonathan Brooks in this one as well, but we'll have to kind of wait and see over the next few weeks how that develops. The offense got worse with Bryce Young, and also the backfield got a little bit more muddy. Deontay Johnson, to put the cherry on top, seeing Patrick Surtain in shadow coverage, definitely not a must-start by any means. Cortland Sutton and Troy Franklin, if you need a flyer wide receiver to play this week, I think you could do worse because the Panthers are terrible against the fantasy wide receiver position. Troy Franklin commanding a lot of targets. Cortland Sutton, notoriously a red zone guy. I think Troy Franklin is actually the guy I prefer of the two of them. So if you were looking for a DFS play, or maybe you just needed a low-end upside play, I think Troy Franklin could be a good option this week. Chiefs at Raiders. The Chiefs are 10-point favorites, which to me seems a little bit high considering the Raiders usually split with them. Most seasons, it's usually a split home and road for those two teams, and the Raiders are actually the home team in this one. So I could see a little bit of an upset coming here. The Raiders potentially taking down the Kansas City Chiefs, but it does stack up well for Kansas City because Patrick Mahomes against the Vegas pass defense, 23rd easiest matchup there. Kareem Hunt against the run defense, 27th easiest matchup. Travis Kelce against the Raiders pass defense as well, 21st easiest matchup. Kansas City defense and kicker, 28th easiest matchups there. So very good matchup on paper for the Kansas City Chiefs. But again, this is a divisional game. It's in Las Vegas. A lot of weird shit could happen here. Alexander Mattison has a brutal matchup on the ground against Kansas City's run defense. And then the wide receivers also for the Raiders, not in a very good spot. So it's going to have to be all Brock Bowers, maybe some turnovers on defense if the Raiders want to win this game. The Chiefs wide receivers, DeAndre Hopkins, appears that he will make his Kansas City Chiefs debut in this game. We'll have to see how that functions around the rest of the wide receiver core. It would be smart of the Chiefs, in my opinion, to play DeAndre Hopkins in the Rashee Rice, Juju Smith-Schuster role, where he's over the middle of the field, being a power forward, moving the chains and things of that nature. But maybe they're just going to stick him on the outside at X and let Xavier Worthy kind of stretch the field and get some short targets. Travis Kelce move the chains. I don't know what to expect out of this Chiefs offense because they've been so bad. If you guys have Patrick Mahomes like I have Patrick Mahomes in the Flock League, I don't think he's a must start by any means. He's been so bad for fantasy this year. Never giving you more than 16, 17 fantasy points, and most of the time he's in that 10 to 17 range. So definitely not a must start by any means. There's better options, and one of them is in this next game. Bears at Commanders. Caleb Williams, one of those options that I'm referring to. Bears are 2.5-point road favorites in this one. Kind of ho-hum game environment overall with just a 43.5-point over-under. Bears at Commanders, key matchups here. Caleb Williams versus the Washington secondary is the 18th easiest for fantasy quarterbacks. And before the bye, we saw Caleb Williams look a lot better, getting the ball to Rome Odunze, getting the ball to Keenan Allen, to DJ Moore, and Cole Kmet in a big game in London against the Jaguars. Both running backs have bottom 10 matchups, So not a great matchup for Swift, not a great matchup for Brian Robinson, but they're probably still in your lineup as RB2s anyways. Terry McLaurin versus the Chicago secondary, very tough matchup for him. Temper expectations there, maybe even sit him if you have better options. The Bears wide receivers all have excellent matchups. So if you need to fire up DJ Moore, go ahead and do it. If you need to fire up Keenan Allen, go ahead and do it. We need to see Rome Odunze play better. I did actually just recently trade him away in our Flock League because I think there's about a coin flip chance that he has that post-bye rookie bump, and I needed running back help, so that's why I made the trade, and you guys will see that in next week's vlog. Of course, follow the Flock League, link down below in the description, but I do think that all three Bears wide receivers are definitely startable, and both tight ends are definitely streamable. You can play Zach Ertz. He got a lot of targets with Marcus Mariota last week, who is probably going to start this game with Jaden Daniels dealing with a rib injury, and also, too, Cole Kmet had a monster game before the bye. So Final two games of the slate here. We have Sunday Night Football, Cowboys at 49ers, big time old school 80s and 90s matchup here. The 49ers are 4-point favorites at home here, over under of 46.5 points. Pace of play is top 4, and the Dallas DVOA matchup versus the 49ers DVOA defense is also in a very, very good spot here. So interesting spot for the Cowboys, because I think they could get back on track as a passing offense, which is why I am personally, despite what the projections say, starting Dak Prescott over Patrick Mahomes, because Mahomes has been terrible. Dak has at least been functional, and this is a must-win game for the Cowboys if they want to keep their season alive, and I think CeeDee Lamb could have a monster game in this one. Key matchups, again, CeeDee Lamb below average matchup, Jake Ferguson below average matchup. I just like the Cowboys to actually put up some points in this one. I swear to God, Danny did not abduct me to make me say that. I just think the Cowboys are going to be in a better spot to make this game competitive and maybe even outright win it. Brock Purdy, the Dallas pass defense is bad. Jordan Mason, the Dallas run defense is bad. And Deebo Samuel and company, Jennings and Pearsall, I'm sure were big waiver ads for a lot of people. And of course, George Kittle as well. All the matchups are good for the 49ers side of things. All the matchups are, I would say, average to below average for the Cowboys side of things. But I just got this sinking feeling that the Cowboys are going to have a pretty good matchup this week, and they're going to, throw the ball well, and Jalen Tolbert's going to be a decent play, and CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson are going to get there as well. So I'm excited for that game. I'm not usually a Cowboys guy. I don't really love watching the team, but I do think that's an important game to determine kind of a measuring stick of former NFC powerhouses. Are they still relevant? Are they still good? Should be a fun Sunday Night Football game for Collinsworth and Tirico there. Giants at Steelers, the final game of the slate, Monday Night Football. Gross game here. We got a 36.5 point over-under. Under catching the steam, 16th, dead last among all the games this week. In terms of game environment, we do not love that for the Giants and Steelers. We also do not love a shadow coverage matchup for both of the top receivers of the Giants and of the Steelers. George Pickens against Deontay Banks and Malik Neighbors against Joey Porter Jr. So not good spots there. Both quarterbacks are sits as well. You're not playing Daniel Jones. You're not playing Russell Wilson. If you did play one of them, it would probably be Russ because he is the better matchup. Both running backs, though, do have above average matchups. So if you wanted to play Tyrone Tracy, who took over the starting job last week with Devin Singletary coming back, and Najee Harris, who's been pretty solid in recent games as well, those are the only guys I'd really be excited about. I think this is going to be a bit of a slugfest. And then if you do want to start a defense, I think the Pittsburgh defense against Daniel Jones is a very, very good streaming defense. And speaking of streamers, I'm going to break down a new little segment here at the end where I'll break down my top streaming quarterbacks, my top 5 streaming defenses, or just my top 5 defenses overall. These are my top 3 streaming quarterbacks, and then my just top 5 defenses in my rankings to help you guys figure out your streamers, because I know a lot of you guys like that about the old format that I broke down streaming quarterbacks and defenses. Caleb Williams against the Commanders, like I said, very good matchup for him. He's playing a lot better. Kirk Cousins against the Buccaneers, easy matchup, as well as how much better the Falcons offense has looked in recent weeks as well. Tua Tagovailoa, a little bit risky, but I do like him coming off of the concussion to put up a lot of points against the Arizona Cardinals. And then again, my top 5 defenses for the week: Steelers against Giants, Daniel Jones, turnover prone guy. Broncos against Bryce Young. Again, Bryce Young has been terrible in his NFL career. Probably a good matchup there. Chargers against Spencer Rattler. He has been turnover prone himself. Lions against Mason Rudolph. That expects to be a very lopsided scoring environment there, with the Lions 11.5 point favorites. And then Baltimore Ravens against Jameis Winston, who of course we know can throw pick sixes like nobody's business. So tonight's game will be interesting. We have the Rams and Vikings. Like I said, if you guys do want to put some money down on tonight's game, I do have this underdog pick'em. I did a TikTok about it earlier today, but if you guys want to tail some of these picks, you can see them on the screen there. I went through all the rationale on the TikTok. If you guys do want to tail them, you can tail them down below. I'm actually doing a flex entry tonight. If you don't know what a flex entry is, it means that I did 5 picks on my underdog pick'em. If 5 of them hit, I win 10x my money, but if 4 of them hit, I win 2.5x my money. So none of those bullshit, I just missed by 1 picks there. So if you guys want to try out Underdog Fantasy, go to the link down below, use the promo code FSE when you sign up, and you'll get up to $1,000 in bonus cash. You'll get a free special pick'em of Matthew Stafford tonight. You can tail my picks, and when you make your first deposit, you also get our weekly Start Sit Rankings Manifesto for free for the rest of the NFL season if that interests you. So with that being said, like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed. Peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.